My dog stopped. The rock throwing got incessant. That was more of a warning, don't come any further. I packed all my stuff up, packed it all up, left. My name is Don Schneider, as you well know, and I got into the cryptid, I guess you'd say the Bigfoot field. What piqued my curiosity was what happened in 1978 and then later in 79. And so then this has been going on, this getting to the bottom of what's going on, the subject matter for 40, going on 44 years now. And I got interested in it back when I lived out west in New Mexico. And then eventually I moved back to Illinois. So I've been seriously looking into it probably the last 7, 8 years. But I always had an interest in it from 79. Whenever I visited a park, went for hikes, went fishing, camping, I was always looking for evidence of what had happened to me in 79 and 78.
Well, tell me
So
what
I,
happened to you. Tell me what happened to you in 79, 78 that made you plunge into this evidence finding mode.
yeah, I decided to, in 78, I was in Illinois, still lived in Illinois, and I was in an area that I still visit to this day. I was hiking in, during the spring, usually in April into June, we start morel season, mushroom hunting. And I was mushroom hunting, and I had my German Shepherd with me, and was just hiking down these. Basically, all the trails ended, and I was just basically going down game trails. And this game trail I was going down with my dog, I'd been out there probably for 45 minutes, an hour hiking, and I got into this wooded area, and I was hiking. My dog was like 25, 20 feet in front of me, and I heard something to the left of my dog and in front of him. There was a huge tree there. The branches were almost touching the ground. It was like a giant, uh, just oak tree, just one of the biggest oak trees I've ever seen, and the branches were almost touching the ground. It was so big. Something came crashing through that foliage on the oak tree. My dog stopped and sort of looked at me, turned around, and sort of and just skirted back to me. He came back to me, ran back to me, and got right up to my side, and just his tail was up, and he wasn't going anywhere. And I proceeded to take a few more steps in that general direction where he had turned around, and I got just about a few feet short of where he had turned around, and to my left, I saw a silhouette. And at first, I thought, "Who is this big guy standing behind the foliage, behind these branches on the tree?" And I just stood there looking at this silhouette, didn't know what to make of it. I'm 5'10", and it was taller than me. I want to say it was definitely well over 6.5 feet tall. And it was just a black outline. It was still pretty much concealed. I'd say 80% of it was concealed. I just saw the outline, the head, part of the shoulders. And at that point, I chalked it up to some person playing a joke on me. But yet, when I had parked in this area to enter the trailhead, there were no cars or anything there. So I don't know. I was thinking, well, this person somehow got ahead of me, and it sort of shook me a little because when it came crashing through the brush, the first thing I thought of was it was a deer. It was a buck crashing through the brush, and usually they don't do that unless it's that time of the year. The female does are an estrus or something, but this was not a deer. So I just left, and at the time I was unarmed, and I headed back to my car the same way I came. Took the game trail out, found the trail I come in on, and I went back and got in my car and left. And I sort of kept that in the back of my mind and just sort of dismissed it. Following year, living in New Mexico, and I was ended up that weekend decided to go camping in the Black Range Mountains. And at that time, I did have I had a different dog. I had a Samoy. My previous dog, unfortunately, he got ran over by a pickup truck. Got out of my fencing area, and I ended up getting a Samoy and was hiking, doing what I call minimum impact hiking. Went into the an area in the Black Range Mountains in a near a town called Mimbres, not far from there. And I got to the top. There's a summit there where you can park your car on the top of the summit, and there's an overlook, which you can view what they refer to as the Kneeling Nun Monument, which is miles from that observation point. But you can see what it looks like, basically an outcrop of rock that looks like a kneeling nun. So I got my backpack on, got my dog out of the car. We hiked about approximately 11 miles down from the summit down to the valley below. Now, this is 1979. I was quite younger then. I could still do that. And I got down to the valley and set up a base camp at the bottom of the valley, about 35, 40 feet, 30 feet from this creek bed. That 15-foot wide creek bed, probably a few inches of water in it, but it was flowing clean water. And got down there fairly just before noon, I'd say 10:30, 11 o'clock, and went for a day hike. Got lost, got turned around, found my way back to my camp. And on the way, uh, I didn't want to omit this part. When I was walking out before I got lost, I was hearing tree knocks. Just to the, it would be to the west of me, uh, in this forested area in the valley I was in. And I thought, didn't think anything of it. I didn't know about tree knocks. I didn't know Bigfoot did that. I had no clue what was going on. I kept looking over these from the creek I was walking along to these forested area, this section of trees, basically uh, pinos, pines, and uh, sort of interwoved with snake cactus, but mostly pines, junipers, all mixed. And I hear the wood knocks coming from there, and I just sort of didn't know what to make of it. And proceeded along the creek bed, got lost. Uh, Took me a couple hours to find my bearings. I found my way back to camp. Got to camp about a few hours before nightfall. Cooked something for myself. Hung my backpack back up in a tree to avoid bears getting into my food pouch in my backpack. Uh, and what I forgot to do, I had my gun in there in my backpack. So now my backpack's hanging about 35, 40 feet from my base camp. And my base camp was just a little fire, my bedroll, and my dog. And I basically slept under the stars. I didn't have a tent or anything. So things started getting dark. I'd say about a half hour, 45 minutes before it got totally dark. I hear footsteps coming down the mountainside. And where I had descended the mountain, there was like this shale, loose shale, and you could, when you walk in it, makes an obvious. You could tell something's walking in it. I hear walking as though it was an individual, a person, uh, walking down the mountain. And at that point, it was getting pretty dark. And at some point, it walked out to this, what I call a butte on the edge of that, on the other side of the creek bed. There's a butte at the base of that mountain, and it overlooks my camp. And I hear this thing walk out to the butte, hear the shale. I hear the bipedal walking, and I'm ignoring it the whole time, thinking, what is this, a bear? Uh, Usually bears are pretty quiet, and that's why I brought my dog along. Usually dogs are a bear deterrent. If they don't run the bear into you, they usually run them away from you. And at that point, I'm paying attention. This thing now walks away from the edge of the butte, overlooking me, walks over to the edge of that butte, and descends along the side of the butte down basically the way I walked down from the mountain. Descends. I hear it descending the mountain. At this point, it was probably 10 or 15 minutes had passed. It's totally dark now. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I'm in this valley, and the mountain sort of eclipsed the sun. You couldn't see it really anything. So I'm trying to adjust my eyes to the dark to see if I could see, and I couldn't see it. And I could hear this thing walking down toward the creek bed from the mountainside, and I yell out, "Who is that? Is somebody there?" And it didn't answer, and proceeded to continue walking toward the creek bed, and got to the water, and I could just hear it walking through the water on the creek bed, just the splashing, like it was a person. And I'm thinking, what person is walked 11 miles from where I parked down the mountainside without a flashlight at this point? I'm thinking, no flashlight. It threw me. It threw me. I was, at this point, I was not scared. I was sort of in self defense mode. It walked across a creek and continued, got to just the edge of my camp. I'd say within 20, 25 feet of where I am sitting. Now I'm sitting down next to my campfire, and with all the just basically dried out juniper sticks and pieces of wood that I could find. It was pretty scarce. I had a very small wood pile. And so I tried to build up my fire. And for the next several hours till about 4:30 in the morning, this individual from, I'd say, 10 o'clock at night to 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. until dawn, circled my camp. And I'm thinking it's one individual, because the whole time my dog is alerting, and my dog is basically, it's facing, like if you're sitting in the center of a clock face, it's facing 12 o'clock, then it's at 10 o'clock, then it's at 3 o'clock, then it's looking behind me. So I'm sort of turning with my dog, confronting what I thought was one individual circling me. And I had my flashlight out, and my flashlight, I had those D-cell batteries. I hadn't changed them before I threw my backpack on. I had put new batteries in it. And I just pulled my flashlight out when this was happening. And I barely got a beam worth 15 to 20 feet from my flashlight. It was a weak flashlight, uh, those two D-cell batteries in it. So the light's failing. I'm running out of wood in my fire, and this goes on until about 4:30 a.m. in the morning. I'm basically, I'm seeing silhouettes of this huge individual behind these short juniper trees. The junipers were 10 to 15 feet tall at best. And this thing was always, I'm thinking, boy, it's moving fast. It's in front of me. Now it's behind me. Now it's at my left. Now it's my right. And my dog had this deep throated growl, and he never took off. In fact, I actually grabbed my dog's collar, hoping he wouldn't take off. But he was standing at my side, and I'm in like kneeling position on the ground, uh, to the point where I actually got I had a sheath knife, and I got it out, and I was holding on to it for like dear life. I'm thinking, what is this? I could hear this asthmatic breathing. I see this tall figure, thinking, it's a bear standing on its hind legs, but it was always bipedal. It wasn't until after the next morning at 4:30 a.m. when it got to be light out, this thing, whatever it was, left quietly, not like it entered. It entered like, hey, here I am, and it just walked in just boldly. When it left, it was just all of a sudden no sound, and I noticed the circling stopped. My dog stopped alerting, and so at that point, at about 5, after I gathered my wits, it was already pretty much sunup. I packed all my stuff up, got my backpack down from the tree, packed it all up, left. And that sort of started my interest in Bigfoot, because later on, I was working on weekends for a gentleman at a ranch, and he told me about his Bigfoot encounter. And I was too embarrassed to tell him what happened to me, because he told me, don't camp alone in the mountains. I was actually on part of what I call the Gila National Wilderness Area. The Black Range is part of that. And he said, yeah, don't camp alone. And I told him, I'll take my dog. He says, well, at least you're taking your dog with you. But he says, I would advise never go alone. And so I was embarrassed to tell him that. But at that point, I thought it was a person. And later on, 2 to 3 weeks later, I realized I did a little more digging into it. And I realized there's no way one individual could have been circling my camp that fast. So my conclusion later on was there was probably more than one individual, could have been two or three of these creatures. So that was what triggered all my Bigfoot interest, and I started from that moment on looking into it and realizing, well, maybe what happened to me in Illinois the year before was the same thing. It was a Bigfoot, and come to find out, the area in Illinois where this happened, there were multiple sightings. People had names for these creatures, nicknames. They called them Harry Larry. Uh, it goes back to the 50s, probably even before that. Where Native Americans in the Illinois area, not far from where I live, were having eyewitness encounters up until the reportings continued on into the 80s. And it brought my interest to look closer to home after I moved back to Illinois, where I found I actually saw Bigfoot on multiple occasions at night, saw him on thermal, saw the evidence of him, been had rocks thrown at me, been knocked at when I gotten too close, till now to the present where I have one active site I visit where they're generally there all year long, but at varying times during the month. They're not like they're consistently day in and day out, but they may be gone or out of that area for a few weeks. And I sort of figured out that they're gone for a few weeks and then they'll be back for a week to 10 days and then they'll leave again. And then there's I had 6 areas and I reduced it down to my one active site and then my second area where there's activity, where they're there. Probably one of the most active sites in Illinois, where there's been a lot of BFRO eyewitness accounts told to the BFRO researcher for the Illinois area. And I believe that was his first sighting in my second area where I do research, which is where that second area is where I saw Bigfoot on thermal. I actually saw him with my naked eye, uh, crawl into camp on thermal and with my naked eye, both. Even seen him, I've seen the eye shine, heard 8 or 9 individuals, it sounded like, within 50 to 100 yards of me, whooping together like a group, just at sunset, about an hour, 45 minutes before sunset. We heard, me and 2 other gentlemen, we were out there doing research. We heard what sounded like 7 or 8 individuals whooping together like in unison. They weren't coyotes. They weren't wolves. I mean, we do have the occasional wolf group or pack of wolves in our area, despite what the DNR says, and that occasional bear that floats through the area. But we don't have. It's not like Kentucky or Tennessee where we have black bear activity like they might have in the Smoky Mountains or that area. So that was sort of what started me out on this adventure, if you want to call it that, to do the research and finding out that I don't have to track them or follow them. I generally, early on, I did. And following them, uh, this resulted in a second bluff charge on one occasion several years back. So I came to the conclusion one of the best ways to research them is I go into my active area and I could just go to a spot and just hang out there. And generally, you'll hear them start to walk in. Uh, but at nighttime, if you're in that area, they walk in really close. They come in very close. Within, I want to say, almost to the point of touching you. In fact, that was a situation that happened to me at one occasion, and uh, it wasn't even at my active site. It was in a spot in Wisconsin where I was with a few other fellow researchers, three other guys, where I actually had one walk in the middle of the night, probably 3:30 in the morning, walk up right up to my tent. So
And
that,
what did you
go
do
ahead.
when that happened?
I was just, I think that to set that up to give you an idea of what occurred, which I think brought this creature. I think they were already there in camp, and I say more than one because I had another fellow researcher in his tent, 25 feet from mine, tell me the next morning he heard something like dragging its fingernails across the outside of his tent, scratching it, and I was like, you know, well, maybe. And then I told him, I said, well, this is what happened to me, which was I'm laying there at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I hear I got the urge to relieve myself, and it was overcast and really dark out. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face, so I always kept a mason jar or a big Gatorade bottle with me. Turned the tent light on, relieved myself, uh, turned the tent light off, and within 15, 20 seconds of relieving myself, I hear something walk up toward the back of my tent. Uh, sounded like a big man and walked right up to the back of my tent. I had some paper grocery bags sitting at the back of my tent. And mind you, I'm in a little one man alpine tent. If I lay on my back, my left shoulder touches the back of the tent, my right shoulder touches the front of the tent. It was just made for the footprint of one person. While I'm laying on my right shoulder, hear this thing walk up within 20 seconds of turning my lamp off. And it just, I feel all of a sudden, I feel something on my back, and it felt like a palm, like a palm of somebody's hand. And it presses through the tent between my shoulder blades and starts pushing on me. And I started, initially, I started to resist it. And finally, I stopped and I thought, what is going on? And then it rolled me over onto my stomach. And I went with it. And I was like, I wanted to yell out. I had a friend within 10 feet in front of me, south of me in his tent. And I wanted to yell out, hey, there's something here, you know. And I thought, no, I'm just gonna. At that point, I already knew it was Bigfoot. I thought, well, it couldn't have been anybody else in the group, the other guys, because they would have had to walk up with a flashlight. And that was the main reason I don't unzip the tent on nights like that and go out in the middle of total darkness because we had an overcast night. We thought it was going to rain, and so you couldn't see at all. So the next morning we compared notes, and Dave told me, he says, yeah, I had something scratching on the outside of my fabric of my tent. And I told him what happened to me. So we gathered there might have been a couple individuals, potentially juveniles, walking around because this thing walked up. It walked up. It sounded just like one of the bigger guys in our group walking up. It didn't sound like it was something that was, weighed 700 or 800 pounds. It sounded like somebody had, that was obviously sounded bigger than me, but it was walking up in this tall grass behind my tent. And you could hear it as it's stepping through the grass. And it didn't mess with, I had a few bags of camp supplies in the paper bags behind my tent. I think I had sugar, coffee, bread, and some snacks thrown in there, which was a dumb idea. But it never messed with the snacks, never did anything. And we confirmed that later on that it was probably Bigfoot or at least Bigfoot juveniles doing this because the following night, the next night, we all woke up in the morning to this, what one of my co-researchers described as an alpha Bigfoot screaming. He had walked up on the south edge of our camp within probably 35 feet of the tent, just growling and mad and angry. And as it walked in, it was snapping over these saplings as it walked in and thumping. Now the thumping noise, one of the guys said maybe it was thumping its chest. I heard part of that thumping and I thought it was either stomping the ground or pummeling the ground with its fist. That's the sound I heard. I didn't hear the growling because I woke up about halfway through it and I caught the tail end of it. The other guys were already awake and they were like describing what they heard. And one of my friends, one of my fellow researchers goes, as this thing is growling, he says, I unzip my tent to stick my head out the tent door to get a look at it. And the growling like went up like it tripled the volume. He says it just went up exponentially when he started sticking his head out. And I said, "Did you get a look?" He goes, "No." He says, I just pulled myself back into the tent and I zipped it shut." He says it's apparently was watching me, and he says it got angrier the more I tried to, stick my head out. He says I got part of the top of my head out of the tent, and he says the volume increased, and he says it went up in octaves, the pitch, like it was mad. And I was like, well, maybe the juveniles were in camp, walking around again, and this thing was on the perimeter watching part of its group, clan, whatever you want to call it. And so that time, that week we were there, we were there to research Dogman, which I'm no Dogman specialist. I don't know much about him, but one of my fellow researchers, he sort of dialed in on Dogman. Well, I didn't see it, but one of my Dave saw Dogman on his night vision monocular at that one night. It was probably the third night we were there, and he saw him pulled the monocular down from his eye. And that night we had enough starlight where he was able to see this thing with his naked eye. And he described, I won't say it's a classic dogman, but this creature was probably at least 6 feet tall, slightly hunched over. He described its mouth, its ears, had blue eye shine. What he described to me, and I was out on the perimeter of the yard with night vision. Well, I had thermal actually. He had walked up behind me and he goes, I just saw Dogman. So we came to the conclusion both Bigfoot and Dogman were on in this forested area surrounding this property we were on. We were on a property that was in the process of being foreclosed, and the woman who owned it gave us permission to camp in her backyard. Well, she had been gone for probably a couple of years by that time. The backyard was overgrown. The house is surrounded on all four sides by forest. This is up in an area near Tomahawk, Wisconsin. So at that point, I came to the conclusion, you know, Bigfoot are in all these places I was unaware of. So it wasn't really that far fetched to realize Illinois. Well, Illinois at that time had probably the fourth, it was close to Ohio, but it had as far as the amount of sightings behind Oregon, Washington, and California. At one point, Illinois was number 4 on the amount of eyewitness sightings. And those are the ones that where people come forward and actually tell the BFRO or whoever, whatever groups are interested, that they've had sightings. I've come to the conclusion there's probably the 80 or 90% of the people that have had sightings that never come forward. And I've talked to a lot of those individuals who just keep it to themselves and they don't tell anybody about it because they live in a farm community, a rural community, and there's gossip, and people just don't want to have, they don't want their reputation damaged. So they keep it to themselves. And even trying to get these people to contact me. Recently, there was a woman and her husband who their kids have moved out of the house, probably got married, and they've had problems on their property, and they were going to contact me, but they're afraid to because they don't want it to be exposed. They don't want their names to be dragged through the mud. So even though people say Bigfoot's more in the forefront today and people are more willing to come out and talk about it. It depends on where you at, what area, what community you live in. People still are they're closed mouth about it, and I have to respect that. So that's sort of part of that sort of scratches the surface of some of the stuff I've been doing and looking into regarding Bigfoot or Sasquatch.
Well, it sounds like you've done a lot as far as your activity in looking, and even though the first circumstance was maybe accidental, it sounds like you've deliberately gone out to try to research more information. I have a couple of questions about that mountainous area you went to, and you went down into the valley. Did you have any forethought the next day to look for any evidence in those trees or footprints or anything like that when you were surrounded by this thing that you didn't know for sure what it was?
Yeah, I sort of kicked myself because here it is, probably not even months later. I thought, why didn't I stick around and look for evidence like footprints? Because at the time, I had no clue of what tree structures were. I didn't know that they built these or constructed these. The evidence I would look for at that point, I probably only would look for footprints or evidence of footprints. But I uh, realized later that having stayed up all night, gone without sleep, I was so tired. I was like, I just have to climb. I have to go 11 miles up this mountain. And it's not like a straight up climb. You have to sort of parallel the, like when you ski, you sort of slalom, you go back and forth. You have to walk up in this sort of serpentine fashion to get up the mountainside. And I look back now and I realize, wow, the opportunity, the wood knocking was there. It wasn't I even at that time after I left that mountain, even weeks later, I still did not realize that wood knocking had anything to do with these Bigfoot creatures. I didn't know what that was. I didn't connect the dots. But I now realize that now I hear wood knocking or activity in a certain area. I'll generally give them a chance for that area to sort of clear out, and then I'll go in and looking for footprints. And I've been able to find footprints that way and cast them. And fortunately, I don't like if I want to experience Bigfoot, see him. I just go into an area and I cold camp. I go in several hours before sunset, and cold camping means no fire, no lights, and just find a spot to sit. I usually do it with usually another person. I don't recommend you do it by yourself. And then, because I used to camp a lot by myself and I had other instances occur, uh, like where I've camped by myself, where I heard, or even hiking by myself, where I've heard what sounded like something using a stick or maybe it's fingernails on a piece of metal, like hitting the metal with either their fingers or a stick. And I come to the conclusion they're doing this. They're always knocking and doing something like that. And I was in an area last year where I'm walking down a trail that's generally heavily trafficked. And I pull in, I'm the only one in the parking lot. I hike down this trail. I get to an area where there's some hillsides uh, north of me. And on this brushed and wooded hillside, I hear what sounds like a metallic noise, something knocking on a piece of metal, like if they had a piece of like an aluminum can and they took a rock and they were just hitting the aluminum can, or they had a part of a piece of sheet metal from something and they were just hitting on it. And I mean, I've experienced that, and I can't prove what it is, but I have my opinion is this is cryptid activity, and I believe Bigfoot do. I know they do rock clacking. I've heard them wood knock. I've heard them do soft taps, rhythmic taps to mirror my taps. I used to take my walking stick and tap on a piece of wood softly, and I would get that same rhythmic tapping back. I do 5 taps, and in a distance, I'd hear 5 soft taps return to me. And so, and this is in my what I call active site one, where they've thrown stuff at me several times, too many times to count, and they've always missed me. And I always take it as initially I thought they're throwing whatever little stones, little rocks, even sticks, and I've taken it as they're being playful. On one occasion, it got elevated. I went in and they threw something that just missed me, and then I proceeded to walk a little further, and I got two double knocks, 2 knocks within 35, 40 feet, as to say, I'm right here. And that to me was more of a warning, don't come any further. And so I left and didn't waited for a while, came back to that area a few weeks later. But the rock throwing got incessant. It got to the point where during several of our night cold camps, they would throw objects at us for hours. This would go on for 2 or 3 hours. And then we stopped reacting to them throwing things at us, and then the throwing would stop, though, throwing the objects. And they were throwing them like I can only, from the way these objects were coming in, walnuts, hickory nuts, rocks, whatever they were throwing, because we saw them landing at our feet. And they were, in some cases, they were rocks. We could see them bouncing through the leaf litter. So we came to the conclusion they were throwing them underhanded because they weren't like lobbing them in overhead and they were landing, in front of us. And that one night they did this for, oh geez, from 10, 11 o'clock at night. This went on to the wee hours of the morning, probably to 2 or 3 in the morning. And we just decided just to ignore it. Once we ignored it, they stopped throwing things. So that point, we determined they were being just playful. They were just trying to get a reaction out of us. And so, but then when I have objects thrown at me when I'm actually actively walking and hiking, that to me is me getting close to an area they're at, and they don't want me to come any further. So that to me is they're not being playful. They're sort of like, let me know, don't come any further. And when I go back to these areas and they're not there, and I go to these areas where they've thrown stuff at me from, I'll see this classic X structures, top crossing X, bottom crossing X, center crossing X, with a third stick inserted into it, either at the bottom or in the middle or at the top. And many times these X's are secured at the base by 1 or 2 trees. The way they've got them stuck in the ground or actually positioned, so they're in pretty securely. You can't push them over easily. To these giant X's where I've seen a double tree cross with another huge tree, and I ended up leaving little objects at this giant X, quartz, fossil rocks, gemstones that I have found just raw, like agates that I found, and I've left them there, and they've taken them. And I've always wondered. I wasn't there to record it. Didn't ever put up trail cams, so I didn't believe this was a crow coming in, picking up these rocks and taking them. I know crows do this, but I've had instances where I left a Mylar balloon and they took the balloon down. I had it tied at the X, at the bottom of the X. They took the balloon down and they took a blue smiley face about the size of a poker chip, and it's blue and it had a smiley face on it. And they took that, which I had placed by a gemstone, or by a quartz rock I had gifted them. And they took that, they took the Mylar balloon, and it looked like they flattened it, like they put their hand or fist in the middle of the balloon and deflated it, broke the tether off of it, and that chip was missing, that little smiley face. So I went over and I found the balloon now on the ground, and it looked like it had been flattened with some, like a hand. And I picked up the balloon, and underneath it was, they hid the smiley face directly under the balloon. And then the fossil rock and all the other little raw agates that I left, they took them. So at that point, I was like, that was sort of my experiment. I was like, I always tell people, experiment. Don't take anybody's word for anything. Do it. Find out for yourself if what's going on, and if you find it's dangerous or not working, then do something different. So I've had been able to confirm that there is something going on there with Bigfoot. Uh, that
Any
they apparently
explanation? Any explanation why they took the little smiley face and the balloon?
uh well, I heard, again, you hear rumors in the Bigfoot community, they like the color blue. They that was seemed to be a big deal. And I thought, well, I'll take this smiley face and I'll just put it at the base of this X. I'll put it in with some of my rocks that I had accumulated over the years. So I gifted him these little rocks and these fossil rocks. One of the fossil rocks had like a trilobite on them, and I put that down there, and I had like some blonde quartz, and so I had like three or four different kinds of rocks and fossil rocks there, and I put the smiley face right next to it. And then I tied the Mylar balloon was a happy birthday balloon. It had blue in it, and took the tether, the ribbon, and I tied it right above it. Somebody had mentioned to me they like blue, so and I hear they have a sense of humor. So I assumed, oh, they took the smiley face, all they took all the gemstones, they took all the quartz rocks, and they took the fossil rock. That all, I never did find that again.